big commanders aren't really my thing, and I low-key find this kinda weird to be honest, cause I genuinely used to love these big splashy creatures in the command zone. One of my first decks was in fact a Miriam deck, and I've built several decks since then that have big creatures in the command zone. But again, as I mentioned, I don't enjoy this kind of gameplay anymore. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, I just wanted to say that if any of you guys watching this video enjoys these big commanders, that's all good, that's fine. You know, you're entitled to your own opinion, even though you are objectively wrong. So yeah, let's just get into it. Okay, so the first problem I've got against these big commanders is that they cost more to cast than cheaper commanders, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing per se, but it does mean that you'll probably get less time overall with your commander on the battlefield. And an analogy for this could be something like imagine a small pitiful child waiting for the parents to come home from work on Christmas Eve, right? But in this case, you are the small pitiful child, like the player, right? And the parent, which is then the commander, is sitting on the couch at a coworker's house refusing to show up for Christmas until you give them $7. You know, that might not be the best analogy, but I do think you guys get what I'm trying to say here. Having a bigger commander just overall means that you will probably have less time playing with your commander in the format, you know, called commander, which in my opinion kinda sucks. Now then, it's also important to mention that you have the counterpoint of bigger commanders having that special feeling when you play them. They feel more impactful to play and gives you a turn where you truly feel like you're making a big power play, which I do kind of understand. You don't get that kind of feeling from plopping down a slow bat or a spider ham, but in my opinion you can still get that kind of feeling from playing other big creatures in your deck, like having a commander that, for example, just helps you ramp into your big spells faster, like Ruby Daring Tracker, or a commander that helps you draw into big creatures faster, like Secret or Cutthroat. And you can even have a commander that just functions as a protection piece for your other game pieces, like Slowbat Goblin Tinkerer, which I mentioned him earlier. And of course, this is just if you want to cast big flashy spells and creatures, but smaller creatures can just in general do so much more than just helping you play big spells. They can also help you set up engines, they can do Ultron and many other strategies, which, mind you, big commanders can do this as well. It's just going to take longer for those creatures to get out, and in my opinion, they aren't going to be nearly as consistent. Now, what do I mean when I say that bigger commanders are less consistent than smaller commanders? You would assume if you cast your commander, you've cast the commander. It doesn't really matter if it costs 2 mana or 6 mana. And that is mostly true, but it's also assuming that you actually get to cast your commander. Now, why do I say this? Well, the primary reason is counterspells. Counterspells are a pretty big part of commander, and in any game involving a mono blue player, you can pretty much always assume that there's going to be at least a couple of counterspells flung around the table. And your Dragon S commander that costs let's just say 6 mana or something is going to be a magnet for those counterspells compared to your buddy who's playing his Targnar deck, which that commander only costs 2 mana. Now, let's actually take a quick look at why your bigger commander is a removal magnet compared to the smaller commanders, right? Let's just say that you have the option to counter a 2 mana commander, right? You will have spent 2 mana and a card, whereas they will have spent 2 mana and a card. Now your card goes to the graveyard and theirs goes to the command zone, but in most cases it's pretty much an even trade, right? So it's a fine deal, but the problem here is that you also have to consider that your opponents aren't just that one player. You have 2 additional people you're playing against in most cases, which means that yes, you will have traded evenly with one of your opponents, whereas the other 2 opponents won't have lost anything. This basically just means that you and the first opponent have gotten behind on tempo, whereas if you, let's say you counter a spell later on in the game, like a 6 mana commander or something like that, you will have spent 2 mana and they will have spent 6 mana. That gives you a 4 mana positive. Now, of course, you will still be slightly behind the other 2 players, but the player you countered will be a lot behind all the 3 of you. So in that case, the counterspell is worth more. Of course, there will be exceptions to this rule, but in general, countering a spell with a higher mana value is a lot more important to do than countering a spell with a lower mana value. And of course, this logic doesn't just apply to counterspells, it also applies to stuff like generic removal spells. Of course, it's the exact same logic that counts there, only big commanders tend to actually have wards, so in that case they might be slightly better, but they will still be bigger targets than the smaller commanders. Now, of course, this also somewhat applies to board wipes, and that might be more incidental, but in my opinion I'm a lot more likely to board wipe if someone has just played an Dragon than if someone just played a Targnar. And of course, there's also the fact that On turn 2, how likely are you to go into like see a board wipe? Not all that likely. Whereas on turn 6, how likely you are to see a board wipe? In my opinion, a lot more likely, right? And that's like basically just like the reason why I call bigger commanders more inconsistent. It's just because like they're going to be like really big removal targets in one way or another, right? And a lot of the time you might be able to get them out, but they'll just get like removed instantly. So pretty inconsistent in my opinion. Of course, you run protection pieces and stuff like that in your deck to help alleviate that, but it is still a weakness of these cards. Another thing I wanted to mention is the fact that like large commanders do like absolutely nothing for you on the first couple of turns whatsoever. Of course, that's excluding commanders with eminence. But these high cost commanders in general might actively hurt your early turns by making you ramp into them and their higher mana cost, which of course this will help you get your commander out earlier, but it also means that you have pretty much zero board presence whatsoever while the goblin player in front of you is already stacking up an army of goblins and swinging at you while you have zero blockers. Of course, some players won't be swinging because they feel like it's rude to swing at someone with zero blockers, which that's a nice gesture and all, but it's also them actively being a bad player and allowing your deck that runs a lot of ramp and a commander with a high mana value to negate one of its most potent weaknesses. Which, sure, if you want to win because your opponents are bad at the game and don't punish you for being a bit greedy, you can dismiss this argument. But if you genuinely want to have a deck that doesn't get shafted nearly as hard in the early game, a cheaper commander will ensure that you have some amount of board presence in your deck, even if it runs a lot more greedy high cost cards and a lot of ramp spells. I get that I might have made it sound like you shouldn't ever run big commanders, but I do think that they have their place in the commander format. Going back to Miriam, that deck that I mentioned at the start of the video, I still haven't dismembered that deck yet, even though I haven't played the deck like more than once or twice in the last couple of years. And that's mostly because it's, in fact, kind of my new player deck. If I have a friend that I'm trying to get into Magic, I'll tell them that my Miriam deck is probably the easiest to play. And again, that special feeling of getting to play a big creature in your command zone gives you a sense of power and control that you just aren't going to get from playing a 2-mana commander. Other than that, there are a lot of like unique effects and cool creatures that are locked behind more expensive commanders, as well as like just like complete archetypes like Slivers and Eldrazi's, which are at their best with an expensive commander. So overall, in conclusion, big commanders aren't actually all that bad, but then you might be asking like, why the hell did I make this video? It's mostly just to spread like propaganda by making big commanders seem bad and small commanders seem better. And why would I do that, you ask? That's basically because I hate big commanders? No, not really. Well, the real reason as to why I made this video is just like I think there are a lot of people, especially like among newer players, who don't even consider running a commander that costs like less than 3 mana because they just seem boring or like weak. But I do think these commanders have a certain level of charm and some strengths that bigger commanders just can't compete with. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to do with this video. Anyways guys, that's pretty much what I wanted to say in this video. If you liked the video, remember to like it as well as subscribe, and leave a comment if there's anything you want to like tell me or you found interesting in this video. Both good and bad, and you want to discuss in the comments, that's fine, but do also remember to be civil in the comments. And with that said, pretty much just thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!